fuck it. I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be joyful in the midst of oppression.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Tales from the Journey. I'm Stephanie Zamora, and today we are here with Colby Tatusis, who I had the honor of meeting, I think 5 years ago, because I know it was almost a year after my loss, when I went with a mutual friend of ours to a journey workshop up in Canada and got to meet Colby and his family, and have had really the honor and the joy and the privilege of getting to experience some of his work this year as well. The Reviving Indigenous Kinship class was phenomenal, and I feel like that's there's a lot of hard stuff going on with COVID, but I feel like that was one blessing I had this year, was that Colby took his work online and I got to experience it. So Colby, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me and welcoming me to your podcast and project.
Yeah, I would love to start with you sharing just a little bit more about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, as you were sharing, like when we first met, I just had a flashback of you actually stayed at our house, like in the room
Yeah.
that I'm in now. We're doing recording, like this is where you slept. I'm like, oh
Yep.
yeah, you were here. You were in this room actually. Yeah, and it's been a while. It's been a long while, and but my name's Colby. My name's Colby Tatusis. I'm from Palmaker Cree Nation, which is in the prairies of Saskatchewan, the prairies of Canada, and I was raised here. And I play video games. I love playing video games, and I have a passion in working with families and communities and striving for indigenous liberation, specifically in the midst of ongoing attempts of colonization and ongoing attempts of genocide and oppression among the lands here
Yeah.
that's known as North America.
Yeah. And you have a lovely little family. I've gotten to know Andrea a bit as well in her work, and RJ and your mom as well. And you guys are all doing such amazing work. But I would love to start at the beginning of your story. Like we were talking about before, like I know that your dad getting sick was something that led you into the work, but who were you before that? And did you have any relationship to like personal growth work?
It's interesting how I got into this work because both my parents are therapists, and I grew up witnessing them working with families and communities. So I did grow up and was immersed in personal development and doing like a lot of self work and a lot of not revolution, well, yeah, revolutionary work in terms of problem solving and being proactive and doing what's necessary to for health and for well-being in all levels, both mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so growing up with my parents, there was also experiences of having to work through as a family the generational impacts of residential schools, of the oppression of our peoples, and the attempts of colonization on our peoples, and that's like the narrative and the theme that's often not highlighted. And so I think the greatest thing that my parents have done for us as a family was to create the space and to encourage us to do the work that we needed to do personally so that we can continue the intention of ending the legacy and the impacts of that narrative, on that ongoing narrative.
Yeah.
And because they knew that, well, when I do my forgiveness work, it would have most of it would include them. Most of my forgiveness work would include my mom. It would include my dad. It would include my extended family, and that really set the tone for for me in the angle that I was going to approach and engage my own family should that ever unfold in my life. And I am, this is where I'm at, like where I do have my own family, where we are a family, and there's this legacy, there's this disruption in the legacy of taking necessary action for the liberation in the next generation.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so that's how it came about. Like I did grow up in the space, and we also experienced are challenges that any family will go through. As my parents being therapists, they didn't pressure us or force us or to do any work. It was more like, here's an option, here's an opportunity, and it was up to us of whether we were going to follow through with the opportunity.
That's amazing. I know I've had some friends whose parents were therapists that it was like forced down their throat. So it's nice that it
Oh,
wasn't in your family, that it was more of like, it's here if you need it. And so we met through Skip, who's also going to be on the show, Skip Lackey, who does the journey work. And I know from knowing Skip, from hearing your story, that your dad and your mom found journey work. But do you want to talk a little bit about, how your dad's own journey impacted yours?
yeah. So the journey method came into our life through the means of a crisis. And the crisis was my dad getting physically ill. And he had myelodysplasia, which is the beginning stages of bone marrow cancer, meaning he had to get a bone marrow transplant if he wanted to continue to live an earth life. And it was a scary time. It was a scary time and a challenging time. And his brothers were going through tests to see if they were a bone marrow match. And while all that was happening, we were practicing our prayer way of life. And one of the specific prayers that was put out there into the universe and was something not only to help him, but to help other people as well. And the prayer was for it to be revealed, what is it that we're not doing that we can be doing? What is it that we can do to meet our prayers halfway? And this is like, when I'm sharing these words, this is coming from, I'm reiterating what was shared from my mom and my dad. And because I was busy, I was working, and to be honest, I didn't know the full extent of the seriousness of the situation at the time. And my parents, protected us as kids from how serious this illness was. And all I knew is my dad was sick, and he was going to the hospital, and he was doing these visits and doing these appointments and being told not to worry, everything's working out, he's going to be okay. And I was like, and I believe it, like, okay. And then later on, hearing that this is what was here, this is the prayer that was here, and really observing it and witnessing that unfold. And what happened was my mom was walking through a bookstore, and those moments where like a book falls off the bookshelf and like
Yes.
comes towards you, and like just there's like this magnetic attraction that takes place. That's what happened to my mom. And so the journey book, the Journey by Brandon Bays, came to her, like fell off, or was it she was drawn to it? I don't know. I wasn't there when it happened, but that's how it was described to me. And they liked it, and they read the back, and they're like, this is interesting, let's check it out. And they bought it and they read it. And you know those of you who, the listener who doesn't know about the journey method, it's to summarize, and they'll probably hear about it, and you'll probably hear about it later on too. But it's a story of Brandon Bays, who went through a healing journey where she healed herself from a tumor and overcame it, and is well and is still alive today. And that's like the really brief summary of it. And that's what drawn my parents to it, is that, hey, there's physical healing took place here. Here's a story of physical healing. And they read it, and there was actually a journey workshop, the Journey Intensive Workshop is what it's called, taking place in Boulder, Colorado. And my mom and my dad and my little brother, they went. And I remember them planning to go to the journey and them recommending me to read the book. You should check out this book, read this book. And I remember like looking at it and seeing, this Muniao Squale. So Muniao Squale is like this white woman on there, like a blonde white woman. And like growing up in the prairies, it can be really, really racist. And so I had like this notion of my guard up and my defenses up against the white gaze, so to speak.
Right.
And also witnessing and experiencing the hijacking of indigenous culture, and the stories of, non-indigenous people using, indigenous practices in a way where it's not intended. Like an example would be like ordering sage off Amazon, and and so like when I looked at the journey book, I was like, this is new agey and I don't like it. Like, what is this? Are they like mimicking like a vision quest, and like, and
Right.
so I was very critical. Is the point. I was very judgmental and critical and turned off by it completely. And then my dad was really drawn to it, and in that time I didn't want to like discourage anything. And you know what, when you and the truth is, when you're going through a health crisis like that, you get desperate, where you're open for anything, like anything, whatever can help us, whatever can help my dad. And I was in that space. And so the judgment was there, and I put it to the side, and I encouraged them, and I was supportive. I was like, okay, this cool, go check it out. Let me know what it is. And they were encouraging me to read it, but I didn't want to read it. I still wasn't drawn to reading it at all. And then when my dad came back from his first intensive journey workshop, there was light in his eyes again. There was life in his eyes. And he pulled me aside and he said, Colby, I'm going to get well. I'm going to get better. And this is what's going to help me. This is the process that's going to help me, he said. You want to check it out? You want to try it? I'll process you if you want. And he was so enthused, and there's passion in his life. This passion that was here, this enthusiasm. And I was down. I was down for that. And I was like, okay, because it was a scary time. And my dad went from feeling, his whole persona, like he went from feeling low energy to really his high energy. And I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And he sat me down in my bedroom, and he gave me my first journey method process. And it really rocked my world. It shook the foundation of who I thought I was, because prior to that moment, I thought that I didn't have any issues for me to look at, that everything was fine. Like, I have my friends, I'm going to school, I got good grades, I'm playing basketball, life is fine, life is great. And then I don't have to like look inside myself or work on myself. And here, that process, it effortlessly and really elegantly, with the guidance of my dad, revealed the truth that was shut down, that was limited. And it revealed this unlimited humorous joy that hasn't left, that's still here. And the awareness was, fuck, this is deadly, this is amazing. Like, and so when I say deadly, like, for like, that's like a lingo in our area, because sometimes I'll say the word deadly and people are like, what, deadly, like it's a bad thing. But no, like for us in our area, like it's a slang for amazing and awesome. And yeah, and I really, really enjoyed it, and there was so much revealing that came from it. And the awareness was, this is an answered prayer. Like, people are praying for peace of mind. People want peace of mind. They want freedom. They want, liberation. And I'm feeling it. I'm here right now.
Yeah.
And like, just laughing and giggling and giggling with my dad and laughing with my dad. Like, holy fuck, like, why do we get so dramatic over shit? Like, why do I get so angry? And it's like all this revealing of the games that I played in my life just from that first process.
Yeah.
And I wanted more of it. I wanted more. And it was almost like grace, the universe, this source of life, left this breadcrumb. It's like, hey, here's a taste. It's like a little spoonful. Here's a taste of life. Want some more? I was like, yes, I want some more, and then there was a journey intensive workshop in Edmonton where Skip brought it to Edmonton, and my whole family went. And we did our process work, and we experienced it as a family. And it was uncomfortable, because so much truths were being revealed during the workshop about the dynamics within our kinships. And we stuck it through. We sat it through, and we went through the process work, and it was amazing. And after that first journey intensive, I wanted more. It was like another spoonful. Here's another taste. Do you want more? I was like, fuck yeah, I want more. And I remember asking Skip, first meeting this guy, and I asked him about it. It's like, what do I need to do what you're doing? And he looked at me and he's like, well, there's a journey practitioner program. You got to take the journey practitioner program. I was like, there's a whole program? He's like, yeah. And he started listing off all these advanced modules of the program. I was like, well, I want to take it. He's like, well, it's only offered in Europe right now. It's like, oh man, I can't afford to go to Europe. But I really wanted to go. And he's seen that. I think he really recognized that. And him and his wife at the time really were supportive, and he made the option. He suggested, well, why don't you write a letter to Journey Outreach in South Africa, because they'll sponsor people to take it. The thing is, though, they only sponsor people in South Africa, but it's worth a shot. And I did. I wrote a letter, and I actually had to write multiple letters, correspondence. They'd write back and they'd ask questions, and they really wanted to make sure. I assumed that I was really interested and committed to doing the work, and I did. They gave a sponsorship. They sponsored me, and they're like, you're sponsored. All you got to do is show up. Get yourself to the workshop. That's all you got to do. Register and show up. I was like, all right. And it was in Europe, so I had to like manifest some kind of funds to be able to travel to Europe and to get there. And I didn't even have a job at the time. And yeah, and it ended up working out where I did travel to Europe. I ended up getting a job actually that where I was able to make the right amount of income to be able to show up and for the flights and whatnot, to be able to take the practitioner program in Europe. And I was the first one in my family to do it. Yeah. And mentioning my dad, talking about my dad is he continued to apply the work and practice the work while I was in the journey practitioner program, and he continued to do journey work, and he healed. His brother was a match, and he went through a full bone marrow transplant, and he healed so quickly they put him in a medical journal. He was like a case study in a medical journal. And I remember the moment, because while there were people in the same time frame, the same ward where they were going through bone marrow transplants as well, they were still like in bed and resting, and my dad was walking around. And I remember him asking, well, I wasn't there when he asked, but he was telling me, like, I asked the doctor if I can go to a powwow, because my dad, like, we dance, our family dances, and our traditional dance, powwow dance, and I grew up with that I grew up practicing that in our culture, and as an extension of our culture, actually. And he wanted to go to a powwow to go and dance. And he asked the doctor, and the doctor told him, well, if you're walking around like that, I don't see why not. Just like sanitize, like we're in pandemic times, you got to sanitize yourself because you support your immune system. And it was like that, like just sanitize, and to wear a mask was one of the things as well. But we ended up going, and I remember like going to the powwow with just me and my dad. I think my brother might've been with me at the time too, but it was just us. And witnessing him, putting on his outfit and getting dressed, going from scared and uncertain if my dad was going to survive or not, to watching him get dressed, putting on his regalia, putting on his feathers, and saying, fuck, my dad's going to jam out. And I remember, the emotion that I was feeling, because I was still going to powwows too when I was in a prac program, and my dad was going through his process, and sometimes he would come watch, but there was moments there where he he couldn't come out because his immune system was compromised. And so he would encourage us, go dance, go to the powwow, go and dance, he would say. And I remember, and this is a significant moment, because I remember before he got sick, and I got back into dancing, when I would look out for him in the grand entry. And so a grand entry is when all the dancers, they all dance in order, and they all showcase their dance and their style. And I remember like looking out for him during that time, and I would see him, and I would spot him out, and I would always catch him like watching us, watching me, watching my siblings, and he would like watch us while he was jamming out too. And then like that moment of going from participating in grand entry and then not being able to see that, there was like this vacancy, and then going to the powwow in Morley, and then and so Morley is in Alberta, going to the powwow in Morley, Alberta, and seeing him in grand entry, and watching him, and receiving the gaze of my dad, it was really
Yeah.
was reality, like it was life happening. And I remember going back to the moment of when he showed me the script, like the process, and saying like this is what's going to help me, this is what's going to get me well, and just added fuel to the awareness of like, I want more life. And not even being aware at the time of how shut down I really was, or how numbed out to life I really was
Wow.
at the time. And all this, like this revealing of the armor coming down, and the vulnerability and the freedom that comes with that, and welcoming that and embracing that full force, which included all the emotions that life has, all the emotions and the uncomfortability that life has,
Yeah.
and being like present, unlimitedly present, like beyond 100% present, allowed really gave the leverage to soak up moments like that. And yeah, my dad got well, he got better, and I finished the journey practitioner program, and I was the youngest at the time in that cohort, if you call it a cohort. And I was the only indigenous person from North America at the time that took it, and the prayer was to bring it back and to share it with people. And this, every time I'd experience one of the advanced modules of the journey method, I would come back and I would do one-on-ones, and I would tell my friends, "Hey, you want to try this? You want to try this?" And some people would be down, some people wouldn't,
Yeah.
but I would just share it and share it and share it as much as I can of all these one-on-ones, and and it was really enjoyable. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's how the journey work came about.
Yeah. I remember you sharing your story about being the youngest, and what was it like to navigate that whole new experience all by yourself on the other side of the world?
Well, it was interesting, and I mentioned the narrative of the continuing attempts of colonization and all that comes from that. The continue to it's like, it's literally violence. It's literally the continuation of violence on indigenous peoples here in our area. And growing up, I remember witnessing the results of that, but not knowing it's the results of that. So an example would be experiencing relatives from my community end their life because of
Yeah.
trauma, and even not being able to connect the dots that it's because of trauma, around 12, 12, 13, around that age range, maybe even younger, actually, to be honest, and experiencing the results of addictions, and the results of disconnect within families, and in community, and it all came down to trauma. And I remember feeling this urge to do something about it, but not knowing what to do, or what I can do. And the I remember learning about psychology, and my dream was to be a psychologist, and that I would be this doctor and just a psychologist, and I would have my own wellness center, and I'd be like walking down the hallway in my wellness center, like how Denzel Washington walks, like Denzel Washington strut, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm a doctor, I'm helping the people. Like that was my prayer and intention. And I did, like, well, I didn't become a psychologist, but I did go to school. And but like, full disclosure, like, I wasn't really cut out for school. Like, I wasn't cut out. The cookie cutter wasn't cutting me the way it wanted to cut me, is the experience, if I can articulate it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that journey, I was learning words to describe, like English words to describe the experiences that we're going through as indigenous peoples. So our colonization was from Europe. So our colonizer is like the British Empire, essentially. And it was interesting that experiencing this freedom and this joy and this liberation, I had to go to the colonizer's territory to learn more about it.
Yeah.
And it was it's a dynamic that revealed a rage, this deeper rage. And it was a process, an experience that allowed me to meet that rage. That here I am, fucking sitting among the colonizers, learning freedom and liberation, and all these fucking assholes have no idea because they never learned the history, and yet they're
Mhm.
benefiting it from it today. And it's almost like feeling alone and isolated, and the story, and having to work through and process the story of the continued circumstance of colonialism, was a trip in itself, was a journey in itself. And it led to an internal conflict of, how do I reach a point of joy and happiness in the midst of oppression? How can the oppressed open into happiness in the midst of continued oppression? And that, and having to meet that conflict in that situation really revealed the reality in the inset. Like, it was almost like a borderline. I don't know how else to explain it, but the best way I can articulate it is that there's this fine line between insanity and enlightenment,
Hmm.
and also completely deconstructing and letting go whatever those mean
Yeah.
at the same time. And allowing this leverage for choice, that fuck it, I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be joyful in the midst of oppression. And so the experience, of going over there and learning this, was sitting in a room with 500 or so benefactors of colonialism, and having to process the results of that colonialism in the midst of them, was something
Yeah.
that was unique in itself, I guess. I don't know, it was what it was. And bringing it home, bringing it home,
Yeah.
and continuing to work,
Yeah.
within
What do you
myself, within
think
my family.
allowed you to be so open? I had a similar, different, of course, but similar experience when I did my first process with Skip, because my PTSD was so bad that my brain was, I couldn't I couldn't function anymore. I couldn't live my life. I couldn't work. And so I asked Skip if he would help me, and he gave me my first process, and for me it was incredible. Like, I dropped right into source, which for me is always love. And he pushed me, because he's so great at it, to process out things I didn't want to process, and got a majority of my brain back almost overnight. And so I was like, wow, this is amazing. But I'm also more emotions based, personality wise. And what do you think allowed you, I guess is my question, to be so open to that experience? Because I feel like it's very easy for people to get overwhelmed by the depth of those processes and then kind of block it out.
Yeah, well, it I love that Skip processed you, and he's so good at giving processes, because he does hold you to the fire. He holds you
Yes.
to your goal and to your intention. Like, why process? If why do a process if you're not gonna go full out?
Yeah.
And I've had some amazing processes from him too. The privilege of processing from with him. Yeah. So awesome. Good job. Good work, Steph. That's awesome. I don't know. Like, I honestly don't have a clear answer to that. And I really feel that it's people's journey. And I experience the modality of the journey method to be like medicine. And you have to work for it. You have to find it. And the most strongest, it's like the most impactful and the most significant work or modality out there, it's hard to find. The one that's going to have the greatest impact, it can be challenging to find, or it'll be overlooked or devalued, or like it'll just be like people won't be able to find. It'll be in front of their eyes, in front of their face, and they won't be able to see it. And I experienced the journey method to be like that. And it's people's journey, and I find that with the journey method, that it it doesn't take you away from what you're already practicing in your life, and it doesn't come off as this is the answer. This is an answer. This is meant to supplement, what people are already practicing in their life, whatever modality. It's not. And I find that there's modalities out there that attempt to proclaim themselves or itself as the answer, nothing else but this one. And mind you, there are probably like people who have experienced the journey who feel that way about the journey method, but I've always found it to be like a universal
Yeah.
supplement to life practice. And I can say that what allowed the openness to be here is it would be like a choiceless choice. Like it's 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 either be open or numb out. And there's probably some leverage to the experience of my parents creating the space for that. One of the things my parents did was to make the conscious intention to end a legacy, to end the legacy and the impacts of residential school. And through their work and how they raised us the best they can. And I'm lucky. I'm lucky because there are indigenous families who don't have that opportunity or don't have that awareness. There, where I grew up with relatives and with cousins and friends who didn't have parents like my parents, and so I am lucky. And there was like this sense of privilege in regards to that, as a result of the choices that my parents made when they decided to walk through life together and start a family. And I feel that that probably gave a lot of leverage to be open. And I also want to give credit to our cultural practice that we do, and our prayer way of life. I'm sure that also has leverage, because life on the reserve is real, and it's raw, and the emotions are there. The emotional energy is prevalent. And even me, like even the experience of sharing work with community and working with communities, I find that a lot of our people, a lot of indigenous people, they're just open. It's like, I'm open to it. I'm open to it. There's no tippy toes. Yeah, I would say a lot of it is going to be a lot of the openness stems from our cultural practice as indigenous
Yeah.
peoples. There's only 5 generations today that have experienced the emotional shutdown and the dehumanization as a result of colonialism,
Yeah.
and the access to our openness and our spiritual way of life and our culture is still prevalent today. It survived. It it didn't go anywhere. It's still here. Like
Yeah.
indigenous people are still here. Like we're still living how we live from a place of survivance and the practicality of survivance. So I want to give credit to my openness. I want to give credit that my openness is a result of the rebellious children who have experienced abuse and dehumanization in residential school, and they're willing to fight and resist and still speak their language and still remember what their grandparents taught them, and that being passed on to my parents, and my parents
Yeah.
deciding that our kids are going to remember this too. They're going to learn this too. They're going to put this into practice too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What was it? What was the process of coming back from Europe, the PrEP program? I know you said you started giving processes to anyone and everyone, but how did you really step into the work that you're doing now?
Well, because I remember when I said, I wanted to do what Skip does, which meant like sharing the work to its fullest capacity, sharing the work with groups, like, and work with people at a deepest level possible. And that was the prayer, and that continues to be the prayer. And as I continued to experience the journey, and meeting Brandon Bays and learning from Brandon Bays, and her staff, and the work, and I didn't feel drawn to the journey, like to teach the journey. But I loved the process work, and I was sharing one-on-ones as much as I could. And I wanted to do what Skip does, but Skip taught the journey at the time. But I didn't feel called to teach the journey. I didn't feel drawn to do that. And so there was like a moment of, well, I guess I'll just do one-on-ones, and I'll just like shotgun one-on-ones everywhere. Whoever wants to do one-on-ones, I'll reach out. And I started to do outreach work in that way. Brandon Bays' husband, Kevin Billett, and I met him, and he was like in the background and behind the desk at the sound desk at the seminars and stuff. And I liked him. He was really encouraging, and he really encouraged me in the work. He made an announcement that he was doing a program called the Visionary Leadership Program, and he was doing it in Australia. And when he announced it, I was like, fuck yeah, that's the one. That's what I like. And I just felt this immediate like internal pull. Like, I guess I have to save my money again and manifest somehow to get Australia. And there was like this focus to do that. And I was already like making a plan and, scheming on how to do that. And then he did it in Australia. He did the first one in Australia, and then he announced a second one. And I emailed him. I was like, I'm going to come to the second one. I'm saving my money. And then he canceled it. He canceled the second one in Australia. And I was like, oh man, like maybe it's not picking up. Maybe he's not going to do it. And it was like a few months of silence. And then there was an announcement, we're bringing it to North America. I was like, what? And I got so pumped and excited. I was like, I'm going to go. I'm going. I'm going to take it no matter what. And I was working at the time. I was working as the youth suicide prevention coordinator for a service-based organization in the Southern Prairies in Southern Saskatchewan area. And I was living independently, just working to pay off my vehicle and paying rent and all the bills and stuff, right? Living alone and stuff, living survival. Yeah. And I saved my money to take the Leadership Advanced programs in the States. And it meant, eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at times. And I took it. I went and I experienced that work, and it was like a small cohort of us, and we were like experimenting with the work. We were like using the journey method work and making it applicable in the area of leadership. And the experiment was amazing. Like, we were all experiencing amazing results and awarenesses and putting it into practice, and I loved it. And when I came back, the same thing. I was like, started doing one-on-ones and mentioning it to people and sharing it with people. And then a few months later, Skip, talked to Kevin, and they agreed, and they came together in agreement. And Skip pulled me aside on one of the journey. No, there was the Visionary Leadership Intensive workshop that was offered in Colorado. And a few of us went. Whoever wanted to come, I was like, I'm going there. I'm going to experience this, because I experienced the whole advanced ones. And this is the prerequisite to the advanced ones. So like, I experienced it backwards. A lot of us experienced it backwards. We went to all advanced ones. We went to all the advanced ones, and then there's like a prerequisite to the advanced ones. So that just was like, the whole program was new and was picking up. And I wanted to like, hey, I experienced this work. Let's go. And then you'll experience what the work is about. And so there's about 4 of us that went. And it was great. It was awesome. And they liked it. They enjoyed it. And on the last day, me and Skip went to pick up some snacks or whatever. And he said, hey, I talked to Kev, and would you be interested in teaching the Visionary Leadership Intensive? And in my inside, I was like, oh, fuck yeah, I'll do it. And I was pumped to do it, and I was excited to do it. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And I did. And I started sharing the Visionary Leadership Intensive, which was the prerequisite for the advanced leadership work. And I just did as much as I could. And it wasn't about making money or trying to get ahead financially. It was about sharing this work that I know was going to impact communities in the long run, in terms of preparing and supporting future leaders so that they can do whatever is necessary, whatever their heart's calling is. The removal of limiting beliefs and emotional blocks that are preventing the greatness from from being fully expressed at 100% or a higher percentage than where it's at. And yeah, I think we did the most visionary leadership intensive workshops in North America and overall.
Nice.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it was real fun.
how did it lead you to developing, like, you have Rise, you have Reviving Indigenous Kinship, but Rise, which I have been patiently waiting for, because I would love to take it. Like, how did you take everything that you learned from the journey and from teaching the visionary leadership and create your own amazing body of work?
Well, it's an interesting story in how it came about in the development of Rise. Rise is phase 1 to a 3-phased overall experience, and it's called the Agamemnon Liberation Experience, is what we call it. And there's 3 phases to it, and it's just become known as Rise because when it first started, it first started as Agamemnon. That's all it was, Agamemnon Workshop. And Agamemnon is a Cree word. It means don't give up, keep going, is what Agamemnon means. For everybody not to give up and to keep going. So Agamemnon means everybody don't give up, keep going. And Agamemnon is the short version, which is one person, don't give up, keep going. And Agamemnon is like the collective act, like the essence, and the collective action and essence of don't give up, keep going, like a collective resilience, the essence of collective resilience. And my relationship to that word started when I was experiencing work and leadership as an elected official for my community. And so Rise was developed during that experience of being an elected official for my community. And it's really funky because I didn't want to be an elected official to my community. There's a whole political backstory to that we don't necessarily have to get into. And I'll highlight the key points here in terms of, as Indigenous peoples and the experience of colonization, we are also experiencing those results in how we govern. And so here's like a really quick tidbit, because all this leads to the reason why Agamemnon Liberation Experience exists today. So there's an act that exists in Canada called the Indian Act. And the Indian Act is a legislation that governs and continues the oppression of Indigenous peoples. The situation is that the only way Canada will exist, the only reason why Canada exists, is because Indigenous nations made treaty with the colonizer. We made treaty with the Queen and the Crown. Only nations can make treaties. What ended up happening, the short version, I'm trying to really summarize it, the colonization and oppression continued to be attempted on those that they made treaty with. And that showed up in the form of the Indian Act. In the Indian Act, what it did is it robbed the autonomy, or attempted to rob the autonomy and the sovereignty of the continuing nations, by oppression, essentially. And I like to say that the Indian Act is a system and a legislation that harvests corruption. And there is corruption that exists in Indigenous communities at the governance level. And the overall aim has been to domesticate Indigenous nations under Canadian rule. And there's legislations and processes that's facilitating that. And so when I got elected as a head person, as a head man, as a counselor to my community, I experienced the full force of what that is.
Yeah.
And I experienced systems for what they are. And I didn't have the means to articulate, I'm experiencing a system. I'm experiencing the result of a system. And it's a system of violence. It's a system of dehumanization. And why the fuck is everybody going along with it? And I didn't want to go along with it. Like, we have to disrupt this shit. We have to do something so that we can affirm who we are as continuing nations and enforce the rights of our continuing existence, because Canada wouldn't exist if it wasn't for treaty. Why are we domesticating and minimizing the essence of treaty? And so I experienced systems for what they are. And it was really stressful, because one of the things that colonial systems do is they'll facilitate the dehumanization by systemic pressure of ignoring values, morals, and principles, by minimizing, an individual's values, morals, and principles. And I experienced that firsthand. And in my mind, I was like, I did the Journey Practitioner program. I took the Visionary Leadership Advanced work. I'm a trained life skills coach. I work with communities. I got this. I can do this. I can navigate this. And then it was almost like if I was to admit it, it felt like that I'm the exception to the system and I can do it. And the reality is, though, I was experiencing so much stress that it was leaking out into my family. And it got to the point where when I came home, now it's funny because I was living in my mom's basement at the time because I moved home because I was used to live down south and I had my own place and lived independently, and I ended up having to move home. And I didn't have a house because there's a big housing shortage on reserves. So I had to live in my mom's basement. And I remember, whenever I'd speak up and be truthful and address like the immorality of decisions that were being made, whether people agreed with my stance or not, that was an example that was used against me. Like, what kind of counselor are you? You live in your mom's basement. Wow. I'm like, don't hold that against me, man. Like, there's a housing shortage, and I'm trying to do things so that there doesn't have to be a housing shortage, right. And anyway, experiencing that kind of stress, and it was leaking out into my family. Politics is messy. Like, you see it everywhere. Wherever politics is, like, it's messy and a lot of projection there, a lot of emotional projection that takes place, and I experienced the brunt of it. It got to the point where my mom simply said, "Don't come home. Whenever you're stressed out, you're mad, just don't come home." And I was like, well, I have no place to go to. So I remember feeling so stressed out as a result of these systems and the dynamics that were at play in the midst of those systems, that I needed a place to go. And there was no place for me to go. And there was no place for me to talk to anyone, and Skip was available. Sometimes I would call Skip, actually. I'll call some of my mentors, and I would end up being parked someplace, out on the land, out in the field. And just sometimes I would cry. Even I would have to emote and release the emotion I was here and process. And that became the cycle where I was like processing these emotions in the midst of a system that was evoking the emotion, and then like using that for leverage to dig deeper. Okay, well, maybe it's a trigger. So, okay, let's find out where this trigger is, and then continuing to find the trigger and process it, find a trigger and process it. And it's like the systemic toxic environment was continuing to evoke the growth and holding me to fire to my growth. And it was maddening. And it got to the point where, yeah, like I'm growing, but it doesn't feel like there's any progress here because I'm continuing to go back to the environment. And there's like this environmental component to it. And the growth was amazing, but it felt abusive to continue to go back to an environment that toxic. And I didn't know what to do. And I remember talking to Skip about it. And he said, well, hey, you're going through systems. There's a training on systems where you're going to learn from a guy who used to build instruments for NASA. And he's doing things around systems. And he's working with businesses and corporations. And it's really great. But it's invitation only. But I can ask him if you want to come. I was like, all right.
Everyone.
Yeah. And I was like, all right, I'm down. And this was my third year. So our council terms are 4 years. So I was on my second year, actually, in the middle of my second year when this happened. And I got in. The door was open. He's like, yeah, he said you can come, but you got to pay for it. I was like, yeah, I'll pay for it. He's like, how much is it? It's going to be like $5,000 American. It's like, yeah, $5,000 American. I was like, cripes, man. Like, so I ended up saving money. And I went. Yeah, I went, and it was like overall close to, $7,000. And it was a worthy investment. And I think that's one of the things that I really, congratulate myself for is the willingness to invest in myself in the long run. Not only am I investing in myself, but I'm also investing in the work, in serving and working with people. And from that training, I learned from a gentleman named David Dibble, and he runs this work called New Conscious Systems. And, he promises a return on investment with businesses and corporations, or 100% money back guarantee. And it was amazing. It was really, really great. And it made a lot of sense. And it gave me I learned principles that gave me a systems lens, and all these dots were being connected in terms of what I'm experiencing at home and in community, how systems work and function. And there was like this huge aha moment, like, fuck, it doesn't matter how much personal work you do, because systems are gonna have this a result, right? And there has to be this balance, and there's the imbalance that's taking place in families and communities. Because people can do their personal work, they can do all their personal work, but systems are still going to have this influence. And then they'll only do systems work. Systems work can leave behind those if they're not doing the personal development work, right? And so that's one of the, like, that's an example of one of the things I learned. And so I went home and I started applying a systems-based approach to my role and with my community, and it like lifted the weight off my shoulders, and it allowed me to perceive that what's happening, it's a circumstance and it's also a narrative, and it gave me the clarity of what's worth investing my time and energy in. And the process work continued, and I finished my term. In fact, I was one of the only ones. There was only two of us who actually finished that term. It was a rowdy 4 years, one of the most challenging 4 years of my life, because it's also when my mom's mom passed away. So my kukum, my grandma, passed away, and one of my adopted mothers also passed away, and my dad, he got sick again, and he ended up passing away. And it's one of the most stressful, most challenging years so far in my life. And staying devoted to the truth, though, staying devoted to the reality and the truth of what life is, allow me to move through it and to continue to be present. Because is the last year, the fourth year, was also the year when things took a turn, because that's when my daughter River Jackson made an announcement that she was on her way. And the preparation for that, was amazing, and an experience in itself. And so during those 4 years, Rise became a seed, and it started off as Agamemok Workshop. And I remember talking to David Dibble, and because I still keep in touch with him, I'll message him and stuff. And because he wanted, his vision too was to have a team where people would work with him, and he'd work with these, these big time corporations in the States and stuff, businesses, and a really great opportunity. But I wasn't down for that. Like, I want, and rather than a return on investment, I wanted to work in the realm of return in community engagement, and indigenous community engagement. Like, how do we get our young people engaged to the reality and circumstance that we're in? And then Agamemok was born, and I remember telling him that this is what I want to do, and he was fully supportive and said, "Here, take it, take the systems work, and apply it, and use it, and teach it however you need to. It's yours." And I was like, "Oh, awesome, man!" That's like, I was so grateful to him for doing that, and allowing the leverage to be able to do that. And that's what we did in Agamemok, was we explored the systems. And mind you, at that time, I was still doing the Visionary Leadership Intensive workshop. And so what I did was I did the VLI, so the Visionary Leadership Intensive workshop, and then I would do a day of Agamemok. So, and the principles they're really simple, and it could be covered within a day. And so with David Dibble's training, it was like a fully immersive and like a retreat. So I gave the non-retreat version, and we combined the two: visionary leadership and systems-based approaches to working. And I remember mentioning it to Kevin. I was like, "Hey, this is what I'm working on." And he was like, "That sounds great, Cole. Just keep me in the loop." And I said, "When are they doing the Visionary Leadership Advanced ones?" He's like, "I don't know. Like, it's a North America thing, and there was presenters in North America, but it wasn't really happening in the prairies. Like, it was happening in other areas, but on the prairies." And so, and the majority of the people who were taking the Visionary Leadership Intensive, a lot of them were younger, and they were students, and they couldn't afford to be able to travel to where the Visionary Leadership Advanced programs were. So I decided to combine the VLI and Agamemok, and it became the Agamemnon Liberation Experience. While I was on council, experiencing that stress, there were days, and sometimes it was every day of the week, when I wanted to quit. I wake up in the morning and I'd be like, this is my last day. And I feel good about it. And I feel so happy and light. I'm like, oh, yeah, hello, everyone. Good morning, and say good morning, everybody. I'm done after this. And then, I would always meet or run into something that would remind me to stay. And the times when it was really, really serious, like, fuck it, I'm done. And I wouldn't even go. Sometimes I wouldn't even show up at work. I would just going to go order some poutine, pick up some poutine, chomp on some poutine, and my dad was sitting there and I'd be sitting there at 11 in the morning, not even at work. And he'd be like, shouldn't you be at work, son? I was like, fuck it. I'm not going there. Like, it's toxic. It's toxic. And he's like, well, maybe you should go check in anyway. So I would go check in, and those really serious days, I would run into a community member, and she would ask, how is it going in there? How are you doing? And it was a really sincere question. And I would tell her, I would inform her of everything that was going down. I'm stressed. I'm going to quit. I'm thinking of quitting today. And every time she would say, well, agamemo, don't give up. Don't give up, agamemo. And that became my mantra. And I guarantee every time it was serious that I was going to quit, she would turn up and she would say, agamemo. And she was the only one who would ask and listen and not ask for anything in return. She wouldn't ask for anything in return. And a lot of times when people would ask, like, how's it going in there? And I'll let them know. They would say, well, do you have $20? They would ask for something. And, as a council member, like, they would expect me to solve their problems and stuff. But she never asked for anything in return. She was sincere in her support. And that's why I called it the Agamemnon Liberation Experience, because it's like, yes, don't give up. Keep going. And we also need to be aware of, what are we not giving up in? What are we going to keep going in? Because there are hamster wheels in these systems. Individuals will mistake motion for progress. We're like, there's a lot happening, but there's no progress. And people will invest years in these hamster wheels in these systems. And it's like, and I felt like that was me. Like, there I am, agamemo, like, just riding this hamster wheel, and there's nothing happening. It's the same thing. And there's like 4 years of my life went by. And it's like, I don't want the next generation to do that. Like I went through it, but I'm not a fake it to make it person.
Yeah.
I'm real about it. And there was failure. And there are systems that are designed to fail. And it evokes the triggers of personality. It evokes the triggers of ego. And I experienced that, where I was like, fuck, I'm failing. And I don't want people to know that I'm failing. And there was like moments there was all like, I should just pretend that I'm not failing, that I have these epic plans. But I had to hold myself accountable. Holding myself accountable to that, no, I got to be real. And then the systems work gave the language and the lens to say, well, the system's actually determining the results, not me. So how do we navigate and apply a systems-based approach? And I've found that doing the personal work combined with the systems work is like, it's like fire. It's like the beautiful combination that gives so much leverage for a person to navigate and to innovate, to evolve, and to completely disrupt, hamster wheels. And so that's why it's called the Agamemnon Liberation Experience. Like, yeah, don't give up. And let's apply a liberation-based approach that's going to be multi-generational, that's going to create results, because it's the systems-based approach that's going to determine some results. And that's how, Rise, and it became known as Rise. Yeah, Agamemnon, because there was only one phase. It was just like, Rise. Let's just call it Rise. Agamemnon Liberation Experience. And it's like, but we got to call it something. Like, if we can't call it ALE, it'll be like ale. Like, we can't call it ale, and then I was like, let's just call it Rise, whatever. So we just called it Rise, and it became known as Rise. Everyone started knowing it as Rise. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, there's like, we should do a phase 2. And then phase 2 unfolded. And phase 2 came about, and that's where we started to do the advanced leadership processes. And the first one we did, I went rogue. Like, I didn't even tell Kevin. I was like, I'm just gonna fucking do it. Like, this is where our people are at, and like, we're just gonna do it. And I did it, and the results were freaking awesome. It was like phenomenal. I was like, fucking right. And I messaged Kevin. I was like, hey, Kev, I gotta admit something. This is what I did. and he was excited about it. He's been all supportive. Kevin, and I also talked to Skip about it, and he was also just as supportive because Skip also co-developed the advanced leadership, visionary leadership work, and I'll keep them in the loop. And they were all supportive, like, yes, just use it and keep us in the loop. Let us know how it's going, and from a place of like being supportive and mentoring the process with the work.
Yeah, I can't wait to take it. I'm so excited. And I could ask you a million more questions, but just to kind of close this out for everyone listening, share where they can find you, how they can learn from you, and how they can work with you. We're going to link to everything, but let them know.
Well, I usually just give the website, which is freedomrising.com, and there's some social media links on there, and there's programs that we offer for communities on there. And just recently in COVID times, we've transferred to doing some online offerings. Like, you've experienced one of the online offerings that we're doing, but usually, like, I prefer boots on the ground. Like, I prefer going to the community and working with the family, working face to face. And we've had the privilege and the honor to work with communities all across North America, going down into California, to New York, and New Mexico, and the East Coast, and Hawaii and BC, and just working with our Indigenous communities to continue to affirm who we are. And if any of the listeners are interested in the work that we're doing, freedomrising.com is the hub.
Awesome. Yay. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing so much of your journey and all the wisdom that you gained on the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for being open to hearing our angle and what we're doing.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for being a part of this powerful community of purpose-driven individuals. We have a ton of free resources for you at www.talesfromthejourney.tv/free, including access to an 8-week sampler of our renowned journey mapping program. That gives you instant access to impactful training lessons, life-changing exercises, and our signature AccuSesh processes that you can implement immediately. We'd love your help in getting the message out and growing our community, so please take a moment to share this episode, subscribe to the podcast, and leave us a review on iTunes. I'll catch you in the next episode.